Hey, Composer Gloves here, and today we're going to be looking at the Spectrum Analyzer in Trash 2. Now, why would you use this thing? Well, if you don't have a good Spectrum Analyzer, this is an excellent option. Another thing is this gives you options a lot of other analyzers don't. So you can actually change things in this one that may be really important for what you're doing. So it's just a really great thing. And it's important to know what you're looking at, because if you're trying to make decisions based on visual input and you don't know what you're looking at, you could be making very bad decisions. But of course, you use your ears, right? Because you're an engineer, you're a musician. So you know, I use my ears. I don't use the analyzer ever, right? Right. Okay, so let's get into this. So we see here that we have our spectrum. If we play it, there's the frequencies in our spectrum. It's actually, this is also a filter, and it acts as an EQ and a bunch of other things. So we're going to just ignore that for now, just looking at the spectrum. Now we have down here, we have our frequencies. So if you click on the plugin, you're now focused on it. So you can scroll with while your mouse is over it, you can scroll with your mouse wheel, actually zoom in on frequencies. Kind of cool. So you'd be like, oh, look at that's 7,500 hertz. Like, how cool. Okay, so now that we've got that sorted, what are these guys on the side? Well, these ones are specific to this particular instance of this spectrum analyzer. So if we zoom in here, this will actually zoom our filter up and down. You see it zooming our filter, and so we can look at our filter, and this one zooms our spectrum. So you see our spectrum changes, but our filter is the same size. And vice versa, if I move this one, our filter changes, but our spectrum is the same size. This is really, really, really cool, because if you're working on your thing, you definitely don't want your it's like there's two of them imposed on top of each other, two graphs, and you don't want your spectrum to go above 0, but you totally want your filters to be able to boost above 0, to be able to boost, because what if your frequencies are like peaking down here and you want to boost it up? Well, you're going to need to be able to go above 0 a lot of the time. And so that's super useful. So that's why there's sort of separate deals. So yeah, that's just it. So you got to know that if in case you're like working on something, you're like, why is it so freaking like weird? And you might not realize that you've been zoomed in right here. You'd be like, making decisions on this sort of zoom setting could be like horrifically bad, versus this, where like, oh, that's the whole spectrum. That's like what it actually looks like. So I keep mine zoomed out all the way, usually, unless I want to get sort of specific. Now let's go into the spectrum options. You right click, you have spectrum options, you open it, and we have a couple options here. This first one is enable mini spectrum. If I turn it off, you see our spectrum is still there. So you're saying, what is this done? Well, if we go over to other modules like the convolver, we see we have a spectrum here. Convolve options. I want spectrum options. Oh, it's not the convolver. Where is it? There are some options here. Takes it away on the delay. And the mini spectrum. Yeah, it does on the... That was weird. Whoa, you saw that, right? I know you saw that. Anyways, this is supposed to disable it on this display as well. I was like, what the heck? The dynamics doesn't, because this is a compressor envelope, actually. It's not a spectrum envelope. Okay, or a spectrogram, or whatever you want to call it. So, spectrum analyzer. But you see, it takes it away. So, anyways, that's kind of weird. Strange stuff. But that's what that does. So theoretically saves you CPU. Over here we have this fill spectrum. That sounds like sort of like Phil Spector, that guy. But he's not responsible for the fill spectrum option, I don't believe. So anyways, if I turn this off and look at this, you'll notice that there's this like top line that you may or may not have. We're going to talk about that top line. It's the true peak option, I believe, or whatever they call it. Not true peaks, show peak hold. True peaks is a different thing that has to do with like conversion and what your peak actually is in reality than what your computer says it is. But we have, so the fill spectrum, what it does is right now you see that it's transparent. If we turn it on, by going, I prefer to get to it that way. You see now it has been sort of shaded in. So they filled it in. Why would you want that? Well, let's come over here to our next option, show peak hold. Peak hold, when your signal peaks, sometimes those peaks are really important because you don't want things to be clipping, or maybe you want to attenuate something at a particular moment, things like that. So you want to be able to see the actual peaks. And so that peak hold is that darker line that's on top. If we get rid of it, you'll notice it actually disappears. Now we only have one thing. So just a regular analyzer, but it does not hold our peaks for us, so we can't see if our spectrum is peaked in an unpleasant way. It can be very useful for identifying like just problem frequencies. So you can actually change how long that hold time is by altering it here. So you see here, we've substantially slowed it down. And you actually have additional options. You have 250. You can actually go up to indefinite, or infinite. It'll just stay there, so you can see your peak. That could be useful. I keep mine on 5. I mean, I don't know. I see it and then I'm like, oh, I'll just duck it and I'll play it again and make sure I got it. That's how I go about it. Next, you have a spectrum type. This is, so right now it's calculating it as a line, but you can do it as a third octave as such. You see, you got this third octave. And they have a couple other options in here. They have critical, which is broken up into bands that are considered similar frequencies. So when you're going to make a change as a judgment, they try to break them up in ways that would be useful to you for judging. I keep mine as a line. That's just my own preference. But you also have an octave, so you can see it in octaves if you want. I'm going to keep mine on linear. That's just what I do. So, because I don't like to come in here and continuously change things. Okay, so let's come over here. So we have, so that's what those do. Next over here, we have average time. So this is look at that. Changes between an instantaneous spectrum versus a time varied spectrum. Basically, if you're doing processing, this could be really useful. But this could be, so like, for example, if we change it to 10 seconds, let me just show you. So if we play it, like, look at how much slower our thing is. That's pretty much what it controls. And if we take it down to real time, it's much faster. And that's pretty much that. Now, if we come over here to window size, this is another CPU thing. If we go up to a higher size, we will actually get a higher resolution. We can see a lot more like smaller peaks. So if you're trying to identify exactly where a peak's at, you might turn it up for a little bit. And then if you want to save your CPU, you come down. But you notice 512, it's way rougher. You can't see nearly the same definition. But again, that's a CPU thing. I generally keep mine at 2048. I'm happy with that. We have overlap. This controls, like, if we have processed, and generated a graph for this moment of time, and then we have a graph for this moment of time, how long do those two moments of time overlap? That's controlled by the amount of overlap. So I have mine on 75. If we take it down to 0, it's sort of it's a lot more jittery looking. So I prefer to have mine at like 75. Just a little smoother. And then we have our window. Now this window, this average time actually has to do with, now you have infinite as well as an option. So that's just continuously updating that spectrum. But if we have, when it's different than real time, because real time will actually dump data and put in new data. I believe that's like how it works. But in window, you also have ways of the way you generate this spectrum is done through various math equations, right? And so different math equations will obviously yield slightly different results. Here, it's not that big of a deal, but you may find a difference by switching through. You may find that it looks different because the way they generate the spectrum will be slightly different. And a good metering suite will allow you to change what you're using to do that, because sometimes you need to do specific things. For us, it's a distortion plug, so that's sort of like, wow, I can't believe they gave us that option as well. So that's pretty much that. That's the spectrogram. Now you can go through, analyze signals, and you're like, oh yeah, this is where it's peaking. That's where this is. And you can change it and make it useful for you. If you have any questions, let me know. Subscribe. Support me on Patreon. And have a blessed day.